Hello and welcome to our video on elections and voting behavior. This material is going to be associated with Chapter 10 in your textbook. All right, so let's start off with taking a look here at the different forms of political participation in the United States. That participation is going to match not only in the United States, but most other democracies that we'll find around the world. We have the big political participation in the United States, of course, is voting in elections, and is really evident when we talk about voting in presidential elections. That's when we get our biggest turnout, which really still is not great. But again, voting in elections is the most common way Americans participate. We also are going to be involved in discussing, maybe attending political meetings, forming and being members of interest groups and political action committees, writing letters and emails to congressmen, campaigning for a candidate, contributing money to a political campaign, and then probably the biggest example of participation would be, of course, running for office. These are all very different levels of commitment and can all be done by pretty much any American with the proper support. All right, participation. The most common, as I mentioned before, is voting, and again, we're talking about presidential voting. There are other types of participation that fall outside of what we consider the traditional realm of participation, and that would be protest, for example. And that's something that's been pretty common here in the United States, and our protection of civil liberties by the Bill of Rights allow citizens to disagree with government, to protest, and to basically disagree with the government and not have fear of any real retribution. So protest was something that was much more common if we go back in time. We go back to the anti-war movement, the anti-draft movement, the counterculture during the Vietnam and the civil rights time period of the late 1960s and 70s. We have seen, and we do see protests today, so it is something that is still a part of our participation system in the United States. Voting rates in the United States have declined over time, and there's a number of reasons for that we're going to talk about here very soon. But you'll notice, if we go back to the turn there, heading into the 20th century, we saw voter turnout rates of eligible voters close to 90%. Amazing in comparison to voter turnout. Let's say, for example, the highest it's been in 2008, going back more than 50 years, we were right at 60, maybe 62%. So as you can see, voter turnout has been steadily declining in the United States. All right, so quick history of U.S. suffrage and U.S. voting. In 1800, we began to eliminate property ownership as one of the necessary requirements for to actually have a vote. So we're talking about white males. Some states had religious requirements. Some states had tax payment requirements. Almost all of the states had some type of property ownership requirement. You'll notice there at the end of the Civil War with the Civil Rights Amendments, we begin to create or eliminate some of those race limitations in 1870. Again, we know what happened in the South with some of the other, the grandfather clauses, some of those other rules were put into effect at that time. Gender is going to be eliminated in 1920. Again, we're going to have grandfather clauses and literacy requirements into the 1960s. Washington, D.C. is going to get its voting rights in the 23rd Amendment in 1961. The poll tax is going to get eliminated by the 24th Amendment, and kind of the big one here for kids that are your age is that the voting age was actually lowered, and that was the 26th Amendment from 21 down to 18 due to that generation that was being drafted into service in Vietnam not being able to comprehend how I can be drafted by politicians, sent to war by the President, Congress, and not have any voice in that decision-making process. So you can see here over time we've had a very long period of expanding voting rights. So again, going all the way back to the early 1800s, we started the process of giving suffrage, and eventually now we're at the point where we have universal suffrage here in the United States. Progressive movement is the element that's going to push a lot of these changes. They're going to place direct pressure and try to grow participation by regular Americans. You'll see here that some of the things the progressives are going to bring about at the beginning or the very end of the 1800s and into the 20th century. We talk about the direct primary, moving away from the caucuses and allowing candidates to nominate, to do the nomination for the political party's candidate. We also see changes there in states, giving state governments and people in states much more power with issues like the recall, the referendum, and the initiative. Recalls, special election called in order to remove an official from office that the people believe is not doing his or her job. The referendum, where citizens are directly going to vote on a particular issue, generally that's a yes or no. They take it out of the state legislature and they put it right on the ballot for the people to answer. And then finally, there are the initiatives. Citizens are going to petition to propose issues that can be decided by voters. So 3 examples there, again, of changes to the way Americans vote. Now, those 3 items there, the recall, referendum, and initiative, do not exist at the national level. Those are state-level devices that are used to increase participation and action by regular Americans. All right, so let's take a look at the voting turnout trend. I've already told you that we've been pretty low for a very long period of time. You'll notice the high point there is the 1960 election between Nixon and Kennedy, and you'll see a gradual decline with a few increases. You see that election in 1992, pretty contentious election there between Bush, H.W. Bush Clinton, and Ross Perot, pretty influential third-party candidate, of course. And then you'll see the bump there again with Obama's election in 2008. 2012, it was on here, would actually have a slight decline. Would have a slight decline from 63% down to about 58%. All right, so political efficacy. Let's take a look and talk about why we vote. We vote for a couple different reasons, 2 major reasons. We have voter efficacy or political efficacy. We believe if you have a high level of efficacy that your vote matters, that it counts. Other Americans, the other half of that, civic duty. We vote because we are citizens in a democracy, and in order to support that democratic government, citizens have a duty to always participate and vote. So those are the main driving forces on why we vote. There's a lot more reasons why we do not vote, and you'll see those listed here on the slide. Again, we have a much bigger electorate today, adding in those ages 18, 19, and 20. Again, we have a lot more people voting than in the past, so that may skew the numbers a little bit. Political parties, we've talked about them losing influence in areas. They don't mobilize people like they once did. A lot of people point to a lack of choice. We have the 2 large political parties, and again, they cover a lot of issues, and there's not a lot of choice out there. You'll sometimes hear, hey, I'm making a choice of, the lesser of 2 evils, and that's not really a good thing for a democratic system. Mistrust of government, we've talked about this a lot already. Beginning back in the late 1960s, there's been a steady decline in the way that Americans trust their government. All right. Voter apathy, again, this is kind of the opposite when we talk about voter efficacy. That's a lack of interest in politics and voting, just apathetic. My vote doesn't matter. I don't need to do it. I don't need to participate. It's not going to matter. So again, apathy is kind of the opposite of voter or political efficacy. We also have people who are satisfied with the status quo. They like the way things are, and they don't think voting is going to change any of those items. All right. The biggest reason why many Americans do not vote is because of registration. Registration is something that is filled and has a certain set of requirements. Let's take a look at those. Registration, big deal. All right, one of the main reasons why we have lower voter turnout and Americans don't participate. Each state has different rules, different laws regarding registration, how far out you have to register in order to participate. There are voter identification laws that have been put on the books recently that have been pretty controversial. Registration doesn't follow with you from state to state. You have to start or re-register if you move somewhere else. Only a few states have election day registration. So again, in a lot of places it's not convenient, it's not easy, and you, the voter, have to actually seek out and be proactive with that information. They had a really cool act that was passed during Clinton's presidency called the Motor Voter Act, and that Motor Voter Act is actually the way that I registered to vote here in the state of Virginia. It gives the option for you to register to vote at the same time as you register for a new driver's license. This was something that was put into place to make things a little easier for people. It's had impact, but it hasn't had quite the impact than what people anticipated. All right, so who votes? Let's take a peek at the people who do turn out and vote. Here's just a couple real general trends here. The more education you have, the more likely you are to turn out and vote. Occupations, it varies a little bit depending on the higher levels of education. The bigger the job, the more money that you make, chances are you are going to participate and vote. Age matters. If you turn out and vote, if you're older, chances are you're going to have a much greater chance of voting. Males and females vote at similar rates. We've had more females voting recently than males the last few elections. Religion also varies. Again, by religion, turnout does vary. Marital status, if you're married, you're more apt to vote. You're going to turn out if you're married more often than you are if you're single. All right, just some general voter terms. You'll find some of those also in your textbook. All right, turnout by country. You'll notice some other democracies there around the world. You'll kind of see there that a couple countries actually have compulsory voting, where voting is mandatory or you can be fined. You'll see there, if you're comparing the United States, we vote on a similar rate to the United Kingdom. And again, they have the two-party system like us and registration requirements, which, might explain some of that similarity. Places like New Zealand, kind of surprising how high. France, very high. Germany, also very high. Even India, the world's largest democracy, has a higher voter rate than us. All right, turnout by ethnicity. Again, you'll notice these numbers here. I have 2004 and 2008. White, black, Hispanic, and Asian voters in the United States and how they turn out. Okay. And they're also broken down by, in 2004 and 2008, who they voted for in terms of turnout per party. Blue for Democrat, percentage turnout. That's what's listed here in 2004 and 2008. All right, turnout by age, who voted. If you look at the different age groups there, you'll notice at 55 and above, it jumps to 72%. And you'll see that your age group there at the bottom, 18 to 24, is also very low, 47%. Turnout by education, again, here we go. Less than high school, 40%. Advanced degree, that means a master's degree, something beyond a bachelor's, almost 84%. So a very, very high voter turnout. The more education you have, the more voter efficacy you'll have. All right, you'll notice here also marital employment status, kind of backing up what we just talked about. Eligible people who voted. If you're married, you have a much better chance of voting. And again, if you're employed and have a job, you also have a much higher chance of voting. All right, again, turnout by income, another big indicator here. The more money you make, the more likely you are to vote. You'll see there, if you're really near down the bottom, you'll see there 20K or less. Even if you're at the national average, somewhere in the 50s, it's pretty high. All right, so if you're making a decent living, if you're even lower middle class, there's a much greater chance and you're going to vote above the national average. All right, turnout by state, just something to take a peek at. How we vote. Hawaii, lowest vote. Maybe that has something to do with the beautiful weather. At the other end of that, you have Minnesota, where the voting turnout rate's 76%. All right, pretty amazing turnout there. Last little slide here deals specifically why registered voters did not vote. And we have a myriad of answers here from don't know to other to forgot, not interested, didn't have transportation, problems with registration, the big one there, too busy, and illness. All right, so that was a quick snapshot of voter turnout and some voting trends. Please make sure that you fill out the Google form. Thanks. Hold on, we have a guest for our slides tonight. Come on over here. Here, say hello to Mike Carson.
Hi.
All right. Make sure you guys do that Google form.